Yes, everyone, what is up? And welcome back for yet another episode of the Off Grid podcast. I want to start off by just saying a quick thank you, because in the past month, I've seen more and more of you rock stars press that follow button and subscribe to this show. It massively helps this podcast grow and get bigger guests, and this show get better and better. With that said, this week I'm joined by Levison Wood. Levison is a leading modern day explorer, author, and pioneer of adventure travel. And in this conversation, we talk about why solo travel is crucial for young people right now, being homeless while starting his own business, hitchhiking to India in his 20s with less than 500 quid in the bank, the psychological transition from civilian to becoming an officer in the paras, and how to be the type of person that steps into the Coliseum of life. We covered a load of stuff in this conversation, some of it a bit left field, like psychedelics, how money can actually make you less happy, and Levison's spirituality and love for trees. So I hope that you love this one, and thanks for supporting this podcast. Right, on with the podcast. Levison, welcome to the Off Grid podcast.
Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely loved researching into this one. And where I wanted to start is with travel. So you've said that if more people spend time outdoors, they'd be happier. Why do you think that?
I really believe that just being out in nature is good for the soul. And it's certainly helped me throughout my entire life, just being outside. I think we're naturally speaking, we are designed to be outside. We will never sort of lose that animal instinct to be outside. And I think that there's just something about being in the mountains, being in the desert, being in the forests that is just inherently good for you. And so I just encourage more people to take advantage of any opportunity to just be in nature. Is great.
And you started solo traveling from a really young age, which you're like a massive proponent for. What
Mm.
did solo travel give you that ordinary life couldn't?
Well, I think when I was like 18, 19, no, 18, when I just finished school, I wanted to go backpacking. And at that, when I grew up in Stoke-on-Trent, nobody I knew had done a gap year, right? It wasn't really a common thing for people to do. So I was like, right, I'm going to go and just go traveling. So got myself a round the world air ticket. I don't know if they still do those these days, but it was brilliant. I flew to South Africa. Didn't have a clue what I was doing. I'd heard about these things called hostels, and turned up at one. I was like, okay, what are you supposed to do now? But it was such a revelation for me to just like be on my own, away from my schoolmates at the time, and figure things out. And after like 3 days of just sat in this hostel, sort of wondering what to do next, you then realize, you go and talk to people and meet people, and you grow in so much confidence, and you learn so much about the world and yourself that I just fell in love with independent travel from that day onwards, and pretty much decided there and then that that's what I wanted to dedicate my life to is the joy of travel in all its forms. And that stayed with me. I've taken many a gap year since then, and it's been wonderful. And it really gives you that affirmation that the world is a good place, because I've got myself in lots of trouble along the way, but mostly people have been amazing. They've been kind and hospitable, and it's just opened up so many doors to me. So I'm a huge proponent of solo travel. It's great. I love going and traveling with my friends, and some of these days I go with a crew as well. Sometimes if I'm making a film, but there's nothing better, I think, than just going off on your own and having an adventure.
It's such a different time now because I was actually having a conversation with a mate of mine the other day how adventure is almost limited just by the fact that with social media and the internet, you know exactly what a place is going to look like before you even go. You can see all the hostels on the map before you arrive. What was what was it about you that made you think I'm going to go and do this thing and you really are going into the unknown?
I mean, it makes me sound really old, but I remember traveling without TripAdvisor and phones and all of that. And honestly, I look back now and think, how on earth did we manage it? Because, now I'm as, reliant upon Google Maps as anyone else. But In the olden days, it was very much a case of you'd have your Lonely Planet guidebook, and that was it. Off you went. Even the last trip that I went that was like that was 2010. So it was just before most people had a smartphone. I think social media had just come out a couple of years before, so I certainly wasn't on Facebook or anything like that. And me and a group of friends, we drove an old Land Cruiser all the way from the UK to Southern Africa. And we didn't have, I don't think we had Google Maps at that point because we didn't have proper smartphones. So we did the whole trip on literally a map of Africa. We had a sort of an A4 map of Africa, and obviously we weren't navigating from an A4 map, but we had this thing glued to the side of our car. And whenever people would, or whenever we'd meet people and ask for directions, they would like, "Where are you going?" And we'd point on the map. We're going to Malawi, and it blew people's minds. And we would genuinely have to just like follow the sun, head south, head west, whatever. And it was just a very magical sensation, not knowing where you're going to sleep for the night. I mean, even now you can still do that. You just have to resist the temptation to go on Booking.com or TripAdvisor to like find out where the place is. Um, so I think there's a joy in being surprised. There's a joy in like embracing the chaos, and that's what I've always tried to do, is not be so fixated on having a plan and just letting the sort of universe work its magic.
Can we talk about the time that you hitchhiked to India when you were 22 years old with, was it
Yeah,
500 quid in the bank?
if that. Yeah, I mean, it was whatever I had left in my bank account after graduating from university, which wasn't a very which wasn't a great deal. I mean, I'd just finished, I'd done history at Nottingham, and I'd specialised in the Grand Tour. That was what my dissertation was all about. And I'd always kind of like, because I wanted to join the army and all that sort of stuff, I'd always had this focus on political history, military history, all the serious stuff. But then my tutor, the guy called Dr. Ross Balzaretti at Nottingham, I think he's still there, very flamboyant guy of Italian heritage. He said, "No, you need to do some social history. You need to learn all about the Grand Tour." And I was like, "All right." And you read these diaries of like 18, 19, 20 year olds from 300 years ago who are off swanning around in Italy and Switzerland and places like that in the 18th century. And you actually realize very little's changed mentally. Like 20-year-olds are going to be 20-year-olds where, in whatever age, and, boozing and all the rest of it. And so I was just fascinated by the psychology of, young travelers, people my age. And at that time. And so I said to myself, I'm going to go and do my own grand tour. I'm going to go and hitchhike. And some of my parents' friends had been like, on the hippie trail. So and I read about Marco Polo. So I decided I was going to go and hitchhike to India. And off I went, literally, put my thumb up on at Grantham Services on the A1 and got myself down to Dover and jumped on the ferry to Calais and just kept going east. And it was the most amazing journey. I think it took it was about 4 or 5 months. But I went through Russia, I went through Chechnya and Georgia, all these crazy places, and Iran, Afghanistan, which at the age of 22, I think I was at the time, was just nuts. And you're completely reliant on the kindness of strangers. I mean, I ran out of money entirely by the time I got to Iran, so I was literally having to like beg for apples. it was nuts.
When you're getting to that point where you're out of money, you're
Mm.
in what is considered dangerous countries, was there ever a point where you go, "Oh God, I need to get home," or, "What am I doing here?"
I mean, yeah, lots of times. The thing is, my mum thought I was on holiday in Greece at the time, so she had no idea that I was just, that I was like hanging out with the Mujahideen in Afghanistan. Um, but like, yeah, there was plenty of times where I thought it was going to go wrong. I mean, we had this car crash in Afghanistan actually. I was in the back of this Toyota minibus with like, I think it was an 8-seater, but it had at least 16 people in there. And yeah, the brakes failed, so it was very lucky that we didn't go off the edge of this cliff because we were going over a mountain pass, and the van ended up crashing into this lorry, which just happened to be parked on the blind bend, which was a real stroke of luck. But the driver and the passenger guy in the front were both really severely injured, and I just thought if I'd have gone off that cliff, like nobody would ever have found me or know what happened to me. And so it kind of did hit home a little bit. But, I was almost there at that point. I only had another month of traveling. So I think there's something about when you commit to something, seeing it through is kind of what your reputation is reliant upon in any form of life or career or hobby, and travel's no different. And that's what I've tried to do is if I commit to something and say I'm going to do it, actually follow through and do it. And then that's how I've managed to build a career in travel and exploration.
And you've traveled to a lot of countries, probably most countries where people are taught to fear those places. Was there
Mm.
ever a moment where you were disarmed by someone's kindness in these places?
Oh, lots of times. I mean, having traveled to you know, pretty much everywhere that the news tells you not to go to. The enduring thing for me has been the sense of hospitality and kindness, particularly in Iran and Afghanistan. Like I say, when I was there in Afghanistan, I had no money at this point, and it was Ramadan as well, so I was getting really hungry. So because you can't obviously eat in the daytime, but come as soon as the sun went down, people just literally like giving you food. It was amazing, and I've had that same experience all over the world. I think there's something about travel at a certain age, though. People sort of maybe they take pity on you when you're like 22, and they sort of like they look after you, or maybe they sort of see a bit of themselves in you when they were younger, and so they'll take you under their wing. I'm not entirely sure I'd get the same amount of sympathy at this age, but no, I mean, I was looked after so well by all sorts of different people on that particular journey, and I've experienced that ever since, really. If I'm traveling with a camera or I'm traveling with a job, like making a documentary, people open up in a different way because actually people like to tell their story. And I've actually found having a camera gives them a voice, so they kind of open up for different reasons.
Do you think that travel changes with age? And if so, as much as you are interacting with the world on your travels, the world's interacting with you as well, right? Which you touched on just there. So, how does that change with age?
I think that's a really interesting question. It definitely does, and your experiences will be, I suppose, like influenced by where your own mental state is at. When I was 22, I was taking lots of risks. I was far more open to just let things go in whichever direction. I didn't have a particularly set time frame. I had no responsibilities, so you can kind of get away with a bit more at that age. Whereas, the reality is when you get a bit older, you've got more responsibilities. Your time isn't necessarily your own, and so you have to work to deadlines and budgets and everything else, which all sounds very boring, but it is. But it's the reality of life. So yeah, but you do come away with different things from different journeys and different experiences. But that's why I would always tell people, if you're in your early 20s, just get out there, no plan, no agenda, just go see what happens. There's nothing wrong with that. I don't think there's anything wrong with not knowing what you're going to do with your life at that age, not knowing, um, not having a plan, not having any money. It's absolutely fine. I didn't have any. Literally didn't have anywhere to live until I was like 31. I was even when I left the army, I spent 3 years essentially homeless, bombing around on friends' floors and sofas. And I have to say, they were some of the happiest times of my entire life. It was great fun, and more than one night on Clapham Common sleeping on a bench, but it was great. It's fine.
Why would you recommend that for young people to go and travel? Like, what is it that you want them to gain
Mhm.
from that?
Well, it's. I think the most important thing is understanding that you don't need to compare yourself to anyone else. It's entirely about at that age. It's all about you and becoming the best version of yourself. And the only way to do that is not by comparing yourself to anybody else. It's simply by comparing yourself to your former self 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 5 years ago, and just seeing gradual improvements. Um, and I think that sadly nowadays there's too much store put on, comparatives when you see social media, like, oh, I need to be as successful as this person, or I need to buy those clothes, or I need to, whatever. Like, but the reality is none of that actually matters. And I found, in my 20s, like the most character building stuff and the most fun I ever had was just like being free and like putting the most store in freedom. And that freedom is invaluable. You can't buy that freedom. In fact, the converse happens. The more money you have, the less freedom you have. If you're completely skinned, it sounds like it's easy to say when you've, later on. But I look back and I'm saying now, like the more, yeah, the less burdened you are with stuff and plans and material possessions and money, the more genuine and inner freedom that you have to figure things out. And certainly for me, in my 20s, I was probably at the time, I was probably frustrated that I didn't have any cash. I couldn't afford to do certain things. But if you don't let that stop you, if you don't take no for an answer and you say, I'm still going to go and do it, find out a way, the creativity that you learn to figure things out is, that is the best education that you can possibly have. So, like I say, I managed to hitchhike to India for 5 months on less than 500 quid. I spent 3 years building a business that ended up being really successful. But I only did that because I was sleeping on benches and floors and figuring things out. I couldn't afford to do an MBA. So I thought I'm just going to go and set up a business and work it out. But, you have to take risks. And that's what it's all about. It's about taking risks. And you can take more risks when you're younger. That's all.
Is that lesson something that you've learned in retrospect because you've built your career now, you've got more
Mm.
responsibilities and things in your life and got a name for yourself in the industry. Did you know at the time when you were going through your 20s that you had that same lesson, or is it only now that you reflect back that you realize that's true?
No, well, no, I think I did know at the time because I read a lot about it. I spent my 20s reading books. I spent my 20s learning about how other explorers did things. So I was kind of like trying to find a template, trying to find a roadmap to how to be successful in the field that I wanted to shine in. And so you have to like trust that, people have done this before. Nobody's leading a particularly unique life these days. You have to go and figure it out. I was reading books from people that died 200 years ago and thinking, okay, that's exactly what I want to do. People don't do that these days. They look on Instagram and think, I want to be like that guy. But you can find people to emulate. I think that's one of the most important things you can do in your 20s is actually find people that inspire you. I'm not saying people around now, it might be somebody from 200 years ago, whoever, but like find out how they did things, work it out. And so, yeah, I had a plan. I was a real nerd. I did my 5 year roadmap as to how I was going to do what I wanted to do. And that did involve, 3 years of hardship and suffering in order to build the life that I wanted to build. I mean, I've written all about it in my book, The Art of Exploration. So if you want to, if you want to, that was a subtle plug there, but if you want to learn more about the how to do all these things, it's all in there.
Yeah, and I think that that's a massive piece of your entrepreneurial time as well, which we're definitely going to get onto. But one thing I want to touch on before that is I've always felt like when we travel, we're in search for something within us. So with
Mhm.
your wisdom beyond my years and all the travels and the places that you've seen around the world, what has what have you learned about happiness?
Okay, so I think it's a really good question. I think it's not what you do, it's how you do it. That's ultimately what life comes down to. You can be the most successful overachiever in the world. You can make 1 billion. You can become the prime minister. You can, whatever it is you think amounts to success or achievement, but still not be happy. Equally, you can go and empty the bins or sweep the yard and be super happy. So I think that tells you really what is more important in life. So happiness is it's not about just stacking things up and getting your own way come what may. It's about how you do it. It's about your own style. It's about ultimately your own values and standards and rules of life. and sticking to those rules. That I think is secret to both success and happiness. Um, I mean, no, tell you what, the secret to success is understanding patterns. I used to hate maths when I was a kid. Maths was like my least favorite subject. It's only now that I realize the importance of maths, because maths is simply the recognition of patterns, right? And the same as music, the same as any art form, it's just recognizing patterns. And so the more success is how quickly that you can recognize patterns in any part of your life. So, and then act upon them. Happiness is enjoying those patterns, if that makes sense. Maybe that was me waffling, but ultimately I think that it's yeah, it's not what you do, it's how you do it, and it's how you dance through life's problems. I mean, one of the most pivotal realizations that anyone can come to is that in every disaster there is an opportunity. Um, and I've had lots of disasters in my life and been through, like everybody else, you suffer grief, you have problems and everything else. But if you shift the mindset and turn it into a positive, no matter how big the disaster, there is always something that you can focus on and latch onto that is good, or something that potentially could come good as a result. Um, that I think is when you can start really seeing the beauty in every part of life.
And when you look back on your life, you place a lot of importance of the making of you being in the paras. And you've
Mm,
spoken about it giving you skills that's led on to your career, but also the mindset that it gave you as well. I feel like the military in general is just it's kind of like a closed off community. You don't
mm,
really know what happens inside. And I've got some really close friends who are in the military as well. So I get a bit of an insight as to what happens to them in the training. But what I wanted to ask is, how do they take a civilian
mhm.
and turn them into a war ready soldier? What is the psychological change?
So when you go into an institution like the military, I don't think anybody can be nobody, you're not quite prepared for the level of transformation that can come as a result of the drilling, the mental hardship, the physical hardship. And so a lot of it is slightly subconscious what happens, but you become part of this big machine. You're a small cog in a big machine. There's not a great deal of scope for creativity other than what you can eke out in the small moments in between the parade square and the exercises. Um, and so it's kind of like what's left after you've been bashed around is is the sort of the beginning of a new person. And I certainly found that going to Sandhurst. I went to Sandhurst having already hitchhiked, to India and been to Afghanistan. So I thought I was all big time because I'd done all these cool adventures. And then you literally go back at square one and you're called every name under the sun. You're doing press ups till your eyes bleed. It's a hard um readjustment when you're suddenly like treated like absolute shit, frankly. And it's a hard thing to get your head around. You feel broken, but that's the whole point. You're kind of like, you are broken and you're meant to be built back up. I think things have kind of become a little bit more civilized since I was at Sandhurst 20 years ago. They've kind of like, they've got rid of a lot of the bee stings, and you don't get sweared at quite as much. But nevertheless, there is an element of being broken down before you're built back up, and that's the military process. Certainly in the paras, you're joining this elite unit where you're expected to be the best in everything that you do, and certainly when you're compared to other units, you are. If you're doing something where there's other regiments involved, the paras are always expected to come out number one, in whether it's the fitness, the sort of the academic side of things, the planning, or just the follow through and delivery. So there is a huge expectation um, that you've got to be the best, and that mentally does two things. It one, it puts a lot of pressure on, and two, it gives you this wild confidence slash arrogance at times that you can just do whatever you want, and you can do it. And so it is very confidence building, but it's also dangerous to let that go unchecked and unbridled. Um, and often that doesn't happen until you leave the military. So I left the military, brimming with confidence, brimming with like this, I can do anything I want. But of course, then you realize there's plenty of civilians out there that are also really bright and really good and really fit and doing great things. So you kind of have to then readjust. But look, on the whole, I had a good experience in the military. Most of my good friends these days are ex-military. My business partners, the guy that I went to Sandhurst with 20 years ago. And it's a great network. People look after each other. And so I do credit the army, the paras in particular, for kind of creating who I am. Um, would I have any other way? No, probably not.
And being a paras officer in particular comes with a lot of
Mm.
respect and responsibility. What was it like being a 23, 24-year-old paras officer in charge of men 10, 15 years older than you in battle?
Yeah, I mean, it's quite daunting because you come out of Sandhurst completely green, and you're told all about these great speeches that Montgomery gave and Churchill, and you sort of come out thinking, is that really how it is? And of course, it's not. You sort of turn up at a battalion day one, and your soldiers are still in bed, or they're like outside having a cigarette, and they're like, who's this new bloke, sort of thing. So you're not suddenly accorded this great honor where you're sort of given a glorious speech stood on top of your Land Rover. It's a very different experience. In fact, when I first was introduced to my platoon, they'd literally just got back from Afghanistan, and so for me to go in there like, "Hello, man," was just like not going to happen. So I kind of, my Corporal Crabtree, Chris Crabtree, he's like, "Shall I assemble the men, sir?" And I was like, "Go on then." And then he cracked this joke. He's like, "Sir, how many Sangin veterans does it take to change a light bulb?" I was like, "I don't know." And he's like, "Of course you don't know, sir. You weren't fucking there." So I was like, cheers. So that was my introduction to my soldiers, which was a bit embarrassing. But anyway, you get on with them. And again, it comes down to like leading from the front. If you can like be in the top three in the platoon in terms of fitness, if you can like actually help them get out of some of the blokes are complete idiots. They'll get themselves in all sorts of financial situations. They'll go and like buy themselves a brand new car they can't afford. They're usually getting like into fights on a Friday night down the pub. And if you can like get them out of trouble, beat them in a run, and take the humor in the way it's intended, then you'll be fine. And thankfully, after a few weeks, you earn that respect, and you're ready to lead them into battle. So and that's what I did. I was commanding 30 odd men in combat operations in Afghanistan.
That feels like a lot for a young man. Like when I think of when I was 23, but also people these days, age 23, a lot of them
Mm.
are living with their parents. They're struggling to kind of make a name for themselves in the world. And then you think about what you're up to, and you're in a war zone leading 30 men in one of the most elite regiments of the British military. It's like, oh my gosh, it just feels like a whole other level of growth at that age. Was there ever a point where that pressure was like mounting on the young man's shoulders?
Mm. I think, to be honest, at the time, you feel like Sandhurst, for all its flaws, and I mean, I didn't enjoy Sandhurst, I have to say, because it was a real grounding. But it does prepare you. It does give you that sense of, look, you're now trained, and even though you come out of it thinking, is am I good enough? Am I going to be able to, you know, put this into practice when the time comes? Actually, when you're in somewhere like Afghanistan on operations, you realize actually you do feel ready because the training it's literally exactly the same as being on an exercise. This is why it works because actually we're trained for this. So no, you do feel ready. And also I think there is something about the sort of the arrogance of youth. You don't think about dying at 23, do you, that much? To be honest, I certainly didn't. I was like, you just feel a little bit invincible at that age. And I'm sure it'd be a very different experience now. Um, but at the time, no, I felt like whilst you do feel the responsibility, and you've got all these people looking at you for leadership in under pressure, um, Yeah, I don't know, but I mean, looking back now, thinking about it, it's like 23. Yeah, there's a lot of a lot of responsibility, and there's a lot of pressure. But the people are still doing it now. You know, there's 23-year-olds who are just getting out of Sandhurst who are doing the same thing right now. So, but that's why I say it's like I think putting yourself in those sorts of experiences when you're in your 20s is a good thing because you can come out of it a much more well-rounded individual.
One thing that I absolutely love and live by myself is the importance you place on getting in the ring and being
Yeah.
the sort of person that is in the Colosseum. And you've done that both literally and metaphorically in your life as well. Can we talk a bit about that?
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, when I was at Sandhurst, I did. You have to take up some sort of a sport, and I was never any good at rugby or football or anything. So I thought I'm going to give boxing a go. Now, boxing at Sandhurst is taken very seriously because if you volunteer to do the training for boxing, it means you essentially are committing to 14 weeks of waking up at 4 a.m. every single day to train for fight night. Now, out of the 20, 30, 40 people that volunteered to do that, um, I think there was 10, there was 10 fights. So yeah, 20 people were actually getting selected to fight on fight night. Now, fight night's a big thing. It happens once a term. So once every 14 weeks, they get the whole of Sandhurst, so the whole 2,000 people, plus all the dignitaries and generals coming to watch. And only if you've turned up every single training session and you've proven that you're um, up for this, do you get selected? And then even then, you have to get weighed off against a competitor. So anyway, I turned up and I was kind of like at the weight that I wanted to be, but I was 3 kilograms under the potential opponent. But my DS, my staff got on with me. He's like, look, go and swig, 3 liters of water now before you get on the scales, and I'll put you in the weight class above. And I was like, yeah, that's the last thing I need, but okay, fine. So that's what I did. Got on the scales, and I was like just into whatever it was, middleweight or something. And anyway, so I was up against this massive bloke who was like way bigger than me. And fighting in front of 2,000 people is quite something. That was one of the most terrifying things you could ever imagine. The lights, being up against this really stocky bloke. Anyway, I won, and it was that single act of like getting in the ring and experiencing that I credit to probably the rest of my whatever successes I might have had in life because it was that single thing that actually because I was never going to go into paras. I was going to join my local county regiment, the Staffords, or maybe the intelligence corps. But actually, the parachute regiment rep came up to me after the fight and was like, "Which regiment are you joining?" I was like, "Oh, I think the Staffords." He was like, "Nah, you don't want to do that. Come and join the paras." But they'd already done the selection for the paras. They were down from 100 applicants down to the top 12 at this stage. He was like, "Look, sit yourself down. I'm going to interview you right now." So I was there with a pint in my hand and he interviewed me. He fast tracked me into the top 12 and I got selected into the final five that made it through. But only because I got in that ring. So I think there's something in that, isn't there? Get in the ring and good things will happen. Big risks, but big rewards.
I've always thought that myself as well. Just the idea of like, it doesn't really matter if you win or lose anyway. It's just get into the
Yeah.
ring of life, of business, of flirting with someone that you fancy,
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
risk the failure, risk getting knocked down. And there was a time where I probably took it maybe too literally. I was traveling in Thailand one time and there's this famous bar on a party island where Westerners can basically fight each other in the breaks of Muay Thai fights. And
Right. So,
there was a challenger in the ring who had his hand held high, looking quite strong and confident in himself. And what I was getting really annoyed by was everyone on the side who was saying like, "Oh, what they would do if they're in the ring," and I was like, "No, screw that! I'm going to give it a go." So I went in there and I challenged this guy, and I lasted all 3 rounds, and I had my ass handed to me. Like I definitely lost, but even still, I look back on that and I think I'm
yeah, but
glad I
what a
went
peak
in.
life experience, brilliant.
Yeah, and you've got a story to tell anyways. You clearly backed yourself as well, even when you left the military and you started up your first business, Secret Compass. Um, you talked about being homeless at that
Mm.
time. What was your life situation?
Well, I'd left the army. I kind of had this vague idea that I wanted to somehow do something in the world of exploring. Travel had always been my first love, and so I was trying to work out what to do, how to turn that into a viable lifestyle. Um, so me and another mate from the army, we said, okay, let's set up an expedition company and run trips for for clients. So while we're doing that, you have to learn the world of marketing, of branding, of accountancy, of business development, all the stuff that I had no idea about because I literally just left the army. Um, how to design a logo, all of that. And I had literally no money for rent. So I was kind of crashing on friends' floors, sofas for honestly 3 years. I mean, I was in between that, of course, I was going on these expeditions. So we went and, like, led a horse riding trip to Afghanistan. We took people skiing on the Iran-Iraq border. We took camels across Sudan and walked across Madagascar. Some amazing expeditions, but they were only like 2 or 3 weeks. And then I'm back in London for like a month or 2 months where I was, back to sofas. So it was a pretty turbulent existence, but I had no idea where I was going to be the next week, the next month, and it was brilliant. We were getting these so many last minute opportunities came in, and it wasn't, I was setting up the business, but at the same time, um, doing the odd job here and there. So I was doing like security work. I worked out in Verbier doing a bit of ski season. I ended up being David Beckham's driver, like crazy stuff that I look back on now and think, wow, what a bonkers existence. But like I say, very formative. And I was between the age of 27 to 31, um, dreaming, scheming, coming up with like life plans and trying to figure it all out. And that's when I sort of got the idea for writing a book and walking the length of the Nile. So it all kind of emerged out of a period of what at the time was probably quite chaotic, but actually was an essential part of the growth and development.
How did you end up being David Beckham's driver?
So, I mean, it was quite good money, that like a lot of people when they leave the army, they go and become private security or like close protection. So I did a little course and then got signed on the books of this agency that basically provided bodyguards for celebrities, and so that was what I was doing.
Wow. Okay.
I've got
And
lots of stories, but I signed an NDA, so.
I was gonna say short and sweet. Um, and you're kind of homeless, going from one house to the next, relying
Yeah,
on friends at that time with your first business. I was thinking to
yeah,
myself, I mean, obviously I've been starting businesses and love the outdoors and backing myself and all the adventure, but I was thinking how low is low when you're going for the dream? I just feel like if I ended up on a bench in Clapham, I'd probably call my mum and see if I can move back in with my parents or something. But what was it like at that time? Was it kind of like a low point for you, or
uh, I wouldn't. I'm trying to put myself back in the mentality. I don't think it was. I think I was just trying to because when I left the army, I did. I went back and lived with my parents for maybe 6 weeks, but I couldn't. That was enough for me. I was like, I need to go and I'd rather go and sleep on floors than sort of go and do that. So no, I think I kind of had this rule which I'd learned in India, whereby you don't want to outstay your welcome. So I kind of gave myself three days, 3 nights in any one place before moving on. Um, and I stuck to that rule religiously for like months, years, where I'd go and stay on, a friend's sofa for a bit, and then somebody else's spare room. And even if they said, "Oh, stay a bit longer," you just don't want to risk it because you want to be able to come back in a month's time and do the same again and have like 10 friends on loop, which is kind of what I ended up doing. Um, so there was a constant need for like figuring things out day by day, but then there were sometimes gaps where actually my friend was like, "Oh, you can come on Thursday, but Wednesday's like," so I'll be like, "Okay, well, off we go to Clapham Common then find a bench," and sort of. So no, it wasn't a low point. It was kind of exciting because I knew it wasn't wasn't spending 3 years living on benches. It was like, okay, one day, one week I was in Afghanistan, another week I was in the USA, another week I was in Colombia, another week so it was like, it was just a great adventure. And I was reading, like, Mark Twain down and out in London and Paris, and like trying to make all these romantic sort of connections, that I was like living some bohemian dream or something like that. So I think I was probably quite deluded in that sense. But I think to get through some aspects of life, you have to be quite deluded.
What do you mean by that?
Well, I just mean, like, you can take it one of two ways. You can think, oh shit, my life's rubbish. I'm sleeping on a bench in Clapham with no money, and people think I'm a tramp. Or you can be like, actually, this is the way life's supposed to be in your 20s. And, like, you know what? Sod it if it's good enough for Mark Twain, or I'm sure Hemingway spent a few nights on benches. Like, you kind of like just you reframe things, and you sort of like look at it in a romantic, literary sense, and then suddenly it all makes sense. It's all part of a bigger picture. It's all part of, I'm sure you know about, like, Joseph Campbell's hero's journey. The sort of this idea that, if you're the sort of like main character in your own story, you have to go through these trials and tribulations in order to gain that wisdom. And that's kind of how I viewed things, which was like, just put yourself out there. Take the rough with the smooth, and you'll come back hopefully a wiser man. I'm not sure I can say that with all certainty, but I look back now, and it does all make sense.
And when you look at adventurers today, one thing that amazed me was at the time that you were doing it, there really weren't that many people doing the sorts of things that you were doing. Whereas now with social media, there's like the algorithm will just find someone who's doing that thing that you're interested in. But when you're talking about building a business,
Mm.
sleeping rough, you were kind of ahead of your time in that you're already doing like personal branding, and what you're describing
I
sounds
wish you'd
like
been ahead of my
hustle.
time on social media, though, because all these individuals who've done like one trip to Kilimanjaro have got like 7 million followers. Is slightly upsetting, but um, but no, I mean, I was far too busy focusing on the actual adventurers than promoting them at the time. So that's
It's almost the other way
uh,
around now.
yeah, it seems to have become all about the hype, doesn't it? I mean, look, I hats off to anyone that's going out there doing stuff and finds a way of monetizing it and turning it into a viable lifestyle. Absolutely, and I can probably take some part in that, because I was I was doing the same. I was promoting my stuff on television, 10 years ago, or more. But look, I would just encourage anyone to go and travel. Whether you do it for the joy, just make sure you do it for the right reasons. I think, like, don't do it just to go and get some Instagram likes. I think it's like, do it because you really want to be doing that particular thing, or to learn, or to share it with somebody.
Who are the modern day adventurers of today that you admire?
I mean, look, there's amazing people doing great stuff. Polar Preet is doing incredible work in the poles. Um, there's so many people that are just really pushing the limits. I mean, I think Jimmy Chin and all those guys that are doing stuff on the climbing front, the mountaineering. I mean, I followed Nims's journey to the 14 peaks quite closely. I mean, there's so many brilliant people out there. It's hard to list them.
And in recent years, you've got
Mm.
a what seems to be a new interest in
Yeah.
trees, which
Yes.
suits the surname perfectly, by the way. Um,
I mean, it was going to be determined at some point, wasn't it? But it,
Destin had its fate ready for you.
exactly.
Where did that interest come from?
Okay, so it's for me. I mean, I've walked through the Amazon, I've walked through the Congo, I've spent a lot of time in forests, and I think, like a lot of people, probably just saw trees as this background furniture to life, right? But it kind of occurred to me throughout my life, I've had these encounters with trees. I planted a conker when I was 10, and it's kind of been this like life companion. It's now uprooting my dad's wall in his front garden, right? And I think a lot of people have got a tree or a place of nature that they feel is like reminds them of home, whether they have thought about it consciously or not. And so And I've always had an interest in the environment more generally, and I made a couple of TV shows about what endangered species. I walked across Botswana with elephants and tracked lions in Namibia and went to the Borneo jungle looking for orangutans. And so I've had this, I work with a lot of wildlife charities, but it just one day occurred to me. I was in the Amazon with this amazing tribe called the Ashaninka, and it just occurred to me there and then. It's like the trees they create life on Earth. We would not exist without trees. Forests were our first home. We evolved out of the forests, and they provide the air that we breathe. And what's more, they are like the central to our culture, to our literature, to our art, to our religion, everything. Tree worship was around far before Christianity. And not just that, like you look at King Charles's coronation invitations, it had the green man on it, this symbol of humans' connection to nature. So I don't know, I just had this like penny drop moment where like I think trees deserve a bit more attention and I'm going to be the person to do it. So I spent 5 years researching this book, The Great Tree Story, looking at how forests have kind of shaped our world. And it's been the most fascinating deep dive into a subject that I didn't really know a great deal about, but looking at it from a historian's perspective rather than, I'm not a botanist, I'm not a tree person by any standard, but I kind of am now. But it was just really, really fascinating. And to go around the world looking for communities of people that are out there saving trees, living in the forests, indigenous people, the Dalai Lama, scientists, shamans. It's just been this incredible like hobby that has now become pretty much full time because we're trying to turn the book into a film.
Has there been this increased interest in spirituality as you've got older?
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, it wasn't something that I'd even really considered too much. Um, until I sort of left the military. And even then, I had a very strict military mindset. Like, if you do this, this will happen. If I apply myself to these effects, then, all that sort of stuff. And then you realize life doesn't always work out the way that you think it should or want it to. And then you can get a bit depressed how things aren't going your way. And then I just had one too many coincidences that's happened in my life, and one too many sort of disasters that I think if I'd have viewed them the wrong way would have probably put an end to all of my adventures. I've broken both my legs in different accidents. I broke my arm, fallen off a cliff in Nepal, and I survived them all. I've been shot at more times than I care to remember. And, I had a few moments where I was like, I'm very lucky. And then I went to the jungle and did ayahuasca, and then it all became clear after that. But in all seriousness, I think all these things combined have given me a new appreciation for life and a profound respect for um, what I think is, a deeply interconnected cosmos and world, whereby if you look hard enough, you can find amazing beauty in anything. And that's kind of why I've kind of gone down this nature route right now, because in a world that seems very turbulent and full of chaos and full of bad news, actually, there's some incredible things happening out there if only you look hard enough.
I've seen more and more in people who have issues with things like purpose and values and
Yeah,
finding meaning in life. There's more and more research coming through now with the use of hallucinogenics and
mm,
trying to find other aspects of your mind that you perhaps couldn't access otherwise.
yeah,
Have they been beneficial to you in your life?
hugely, absolutely. I mean, I think my entire outlook was challenged when I first sat with plant medicine back in 2016 in an ayahuasca ceremony, which just it really changed my perception on my relationships, on being more tolerant, getting rid of like this idea that I'd had in the military about how life should be. And it just gave me a new sense of losing an old, shedding an old identity and embracing a new one, which is more tolerant, more respectful, more open to new ideas. And that in turn then unlocked a load of other doors like creativity. And so, yeah, I'd give a lot of credit to um, those plants and the entheogens and the psychedelics that can unlock a new aspect of life.
And last year you became a dad, a
Yeah.
massive life achievement. How has your young daughter changed the way that you see the world?
Well, becoming a father, to be honest, wasn't something I had on my radar. I was kind of fully focused on the adventures, and then when this magic happens, and you're sort of like, okay, right, life's changed, life is going to change, it's going to keep changing. You're kind of forced to adapt, and you're forced to change your own entire outlook on why you're doing what you're doing. And so for me, it's been the most amazing transformation because your life suddenly is no longer about yourself. It's no longer about what you think is whatever you're doing. It's about providing for a family. It's about setting a good example. It's about being the best version of yourself, not just for yourself anymore, but also for your child. And you learn a lot as well. And every day is a joy.
Looking at all of your life in its entirety from an outside perspective, it
Mhm.
almost feels like there's so much that you've done in the world that's like it's hard to touch. It's like it almost feels like out of reach because you're just at that point where you've done so many expeditions and so many things that when you're at the start, it kind of is like, oh
Mm.
my God, how do I live a life like that? So for like a young guy who's
Yeah.
running a podcast and wants to live a life and adventure, what advice
Yeah.
would you give to that person?
I mean, look, I grew up in Stoke-on-Trent. Both my parents were teachers. We had no money. Um, I didn't grow up with a silver spoon in my mouth or anything like that. I sort of the one thing that opened doors for me was just reading from a young age. I was fascinated by storytelling, and being inspired by other people. So I read about explorers, I read about great people that had done amazing things, and I was like, how do I? So I was in the same position, figuring out how can I do something that I can be proud of. Um, and it's kind of like I think courage is the first step. It's about overcoming fear because if you can overcome the first step of fear and think, why aren't I allowed to go and do something like this? Because a lot of people, it's not that they're scared to do something, is they feel they're not allowed to do something. They lack the agency, which is just about it's just fear. So if you can take the first step and say, no, I'm allowed to go and explore this idea. I'm allowed to go and, give this a go. And if you can do that, then everything can suddenly be broken down into like bite-sized steps. You can go, okay, well, in order to do this, firstly, I need to figure out who's done it before, what steps did they take, and then how do I emulate those things and find a template and, like I said before, this roadmap to the life that you want to lead. But the first step is courage. It's having that belief that you're allowed to go and embark on that life in the first place.
Levison, thanks a lot for coming on.
Thank you, Jake.
Cheers. Mate, that was brilliant. Thank you very
Is that
much.
all right? Just in time, my baby's just started screaming in the background.